When we just go up the mountain and to a place where it's not made into concrete pathways or cableway, but it's there, we got such an access to wilderness here, and that's not nature. Wilderness is a different category of it.
The wild part of nature, not so touched by
not
human.
tamed and not categorized, but where things go wild, and it might even be a bit dangerous, because there might be an animal that could kill us. And to just go into that space and to feel lost in that space and to feel a little bit of fear in that place, when you are there at night and you have your little campfire and you hear some sound from behind and you don't know what it is, to go back into that state that was the same state for hundreds of thousands of years for our ancestors,
Hello and welcome to the NixyPod podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Renee, a quantum coach and filmmaker sharing authentic spiritual adventures. We deep dive into life's mysteries and magic with amazing people that have followed their calling and have a wealth of knowledge to share. Each episode is an invitation to spark and nurture your soul. Bernd Bierbaum is an anthropologist, an author, a world traveler. He's taken groups of people around the world. He's a painter. He takes amazing photographs. Have I missed anything out, Bernd?
Good enough.
I mean, there's so much. I love how you put everything together in what you do, and it all flows so beautifully. So I checked in with my guides before our interview, and I was asking them, what is the crux for the people that listen to this podcast about you and what you can give to the world and to our listeners? And the message that came back was that as an anthropologist, bringing the old into the new, you light a fire in those fellow humans around you to really bring all those spiritual and maybe animistic philosophies back into our modern life and be able to use them. And reading a little bit about you, I see that is part of your passion and maybe why we connect so well as well. So to start with, tell me a little bit about what brought you into all the things that you do. Where did the passion start to follow anthropology and then into all these beautiful arts that have followed that?
Yeah, looking back, it's not really a miracle or something. It starts out when I was 16 and I really didn't know what to do with myself, and somehow I just got the impulse from family, from friends, maybe from the time that I was living, that travel would be good, just go out there, hitchhike. I grew up in Germany. It was easy to hitchhike everywhere in Europe. So I started doing that at age 16, 17. I went to America for an exchange year. So I did my senior year at an American high school. And we had quite a contact there with the local indigenous groups living in the Pacific Northwest. And they had classes in high school about them, and it was just super fascinating to go out and see for myself what an Indian or an indigenous culture could look like. And it just became, this little snowball that went on and became bigger and bigger. And so travel had part of it, and to write journals about it was parts of it, and then eventually painting came along. And I also went to Japan when I was 19, spent 3 months there again hitchhiking, and I had a friend in Tokyo at the American University, and he said, come on, and I ended up in some postdoctorate get-together about Japanese culture. And I remember the Scottish professor of how he dissected Japanese culture. It was super fascinating, and I thought, that's what I want to get into. And so it all came together and went apart and came together again, and here I am now at this point of my life,
And I read on your website that you grew up with a lot of nature around you. Did that also influence you, do you think?
I think it did, and my parents as well were very instrumental, because we every time that we went out, we went to prehistoric sites there in the area that I grew up. They were very interested in old cultures, or remnants of old cultures, and I think also the way that they saw the landscape being the ground of an ancient ocean that was once there, or volcanoes that had arisen 500 million years ago, and they could point it out. It was quite a beautiful world that I grew up in that way.
And tell me some of the indigenous cultures that you've been to visit or lived with, and some of their ideologies.
I went to, for my master's degree, for instance, I went to Brazil. So I spent a year with a tribe in the south of the state of Bahia. It didn't really turn out to be a very traditional living tribe, if I use that word. It was a community that was very acculturated, very Brazilian in a way. Many of the people lived on farms and spoke Portuguese and had lost a little bit the contact to their old ways. But there were still people doing it the traditional way, hunting, fishing, and there were some shamans there. There were some rituals happening. But it was a culture in trauma, in distress, and not really recognized by the surrounding and discriminated against. So that was my challenge in a way. When you do that, you usually work for two universities, the one in this case from Europe and the other one from Brazil, the one in the country that you do the study in. And the Brazilians, they were very much on the trajectory of helping people. That was their main focus. So it's called action anthropology. You learn something to put that into action and uplift them in a way. So that went on all right. It was quite a tedious job to set up lineages, how everyone is connected in these communities, about 2,000 people in total, and to fight for the land rights, which fortunately then eventually was put into effect. So that's a good thing, because you spend so much time with them, they have expectations. What's this guy doing here the whole time? On the other side, the European university, they wanted to know more about religion and rituals and ceremonies. That's what they were interested in.
That sounds very interesting.
I know. In a way, that's the cherry on the cake. But it takes forever for that to happen. You need to have someone important die, or some important person giving birth to a new child, and then the shamans come, and then the whole community in that case, they almost went from one reality to another. They moved across some threshold into a different space, and that other space was full of ancestors floating about and hitting you, like a little...
So did you have an experience of that?
Yeah, I remember quite a few of these, touches by something that I didn't see, and it was simply explained as being, that's ancestor so-and-so, they don't know you yet, they want to get to know you, and okay, so it's fine, stay here, you're part of the ritual now. And it was quite amazing how natural that came about. It wasn't that you needed a shaman to explain that to you, but the whole community was part of that.
They all understood it, even though they were living a completely different life to that ritualistic life that they used to live. It's still, they remember it as they go into those rituals.
Yeah. It was
which is
just
amazing. It's wonderful to hear, because there's so many indigenous cultures around the world that have more and more lost that cultural reference. So it's amazing to hear that as they do it, it's remembered.
Yeah. I mean, it was because they, at the time already, they were connecting more and more again to nature around themselves. And that, of course, is full with symbols of the past. And they were starting to adopt the old traditional indigenous names for themselves. So they stopped calling themselves by the Portuguese names. So there was a little bit of an awakening slowly happening at the time. But I think it's actually not that difficult. It's like with us. Many of us have been distant from our traditional culture, from our own old culture for a very long time. And all actually you have to do is just chill down, start meditate for half an hour, and bam, it comes back. It's not that it's completely gone. And So it's easy to bring it back. And in this case, yeah, it was facilitated by the system in a way of the shamans who helped. And the older people, they still spoke the traditional language. They also added in with their gravitas in a way, and the young people easily followed their way.
So we can bring that into our daily lives, no matter what our culture is, just by slowing down.
I think it's there, and we don't have to go to the end of the world to find it. It's
inside. It's in the DNA.
Yeah.
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 And what else has been similar to that, or where else have you been that maybe is completely different to that?
Well, I've spent a lot of time with indigenous people pretty much all over the show, especially since I started guiding for this study tour operator, and I went back and back to the same place over the years.
So you go to quite remote places?
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, that was really my focus, and that's what the company wanted, to send anthropologists to these places. And so I went to be with Aboriginal groups in Australia, with local people in Borneo, and like 20 times Borneo for 3 weeks. And sometimes we worked with universities to make contact, or I just on my own, I just over the years developed some contact to teachers and students from universities doing field studies. They're doing excavations or whatever, and then over the years, being 15 times to Easter Island and spending a week there each time, there's something that comes together, and there's a bit of a different perspective, perhaps in the end.
So what can we learn from these cultures that you've been to that not that many people have been to, because they're so remote?
There's so many people that live a lifestyle that is not really ours. If we call ours perhaps the Neolithic ones, of big agriculture and subduing the world for our benefit and grabbing whatever we can grab. There is all that other reality out there as well, and there's millions, hundreds of millions. I think in India there's about 150 million people classified as tribal people officially. So if you add that all together, we easily come to about 500 million people that don't live our way of life. They're in that buffer zone, maybe they're connected a little bit, but that is a very important buffer zone, because we can also go back into that. So it's actually 3 types of cultures. It's ours, it's theirs, and then there's that thing in between. And the thing in between has developed over hundreds of years. And so obviously if I go to, say, Borneo, I'm not going to be with the most traditional people in Borneo. I'm with people that had contact before, and that's a good thing. It's not that everyone should just rock up with very remote people living very traditionally. We're not supposed to be there, really.
Yes.
So, that was probably what I learned most about, how people live in that buffer zone. And then also, the archaeology, the remnants, of the energy that's in sacred sites. Mm-hmm. That was really interesting. And to go to Nazca in Peru 20 times, and to go to the Haida Indians up in the Pacific Northwest and stay with them.
What were they like? What were the Indians?
Well, they're cutting down trees, they're loggers, but and they have fishing boats, and they take out as much as they can. But so it is sometimes a little bit difficult for us to reconnect to that, because we have that very romantic image about them.
Right.
But nevertheless, there is something growing there as much as there's something growing in us, an awareness for the environment. And then they, of course, have a different chance than we do, because they can go back to their traditional ways, which are still there somewhere. They are growing up with totem poles that are withering away, but they still have ancestors, they still have artists, they still have storytelling that's alive. And then on the other side, they get our environmental, ecological awareness, or new spirituality, and they can benefit from both. And there's always something new that comes out of it. So it's fascinating how these little pockets are developing in a way, and maybe one day they are not going to take out all the fish anymore, but just a few fish, or they're not, chopping down all the trees. There will be, if once...
Find a more sustainable way from the science of the West.
Yeah. I think it's a very normal process to come to that eventually you see the forests are depleted. You have to do something about it. You remember how it was when you grew up. So there is that thing that will develop, like as it does with us. Our awareness is much bigger now than maybe 20, 30 years ago.
Absolutely.
Same thing happening there. And
in general, in a wider view.
Yeah.
So in my travels, what I've noticed with what we call the First People, or many San or Khoi people call themselves Bushmen now, there's a longing to go back to the old ways. What do you think about allowing that, or finding a way for them to fully go back into those old ways?
Well, anthropologists really like traditional old ways, right?
Yeah.
We are not revolutionaries in a way that maybe some other sciences are. Like sociologists would usually do something to stop something that they don't deem worthy in a way. But we are not the ones to tell people normally, like, stop that tradition or that custom. In some cases, yes, if it inflicts pain on people, or on women especially, or children, then of course it should be stopped. But in general, we are invited into these cultures. People are very generous to us. We are there as participant observers. And then we also become a little humble with that. And we want to help them, in a way, preserve what they have. So I think many of us see that as a real big benefit of the journey, that they can come back, that the land is now stabilized, they got the land rights. And then we hope for something to develop there. And I think what comes from it is purpose, because a lot of these indigenous cultures have problems with substance abuse and all these things. And pretty much every experiment of giving them rights has shown that eventually they profit from more autonomy, even on a national level. Greenland Inuit, 30, 40 years ago, well, they only made headlines because of very high suicide rates and very high alcoholism. But now they have autonomy from Denmark, and things are starting to pick up. Yes, it might not always be pretty for us when they hunt a whale, because we also like whales. We don't only like indigenous cultures, so it's a bit of a conflict for us. But they are starting to get away from the vices of the past, because they now have more power over their own future. They find the purpose again. It can all come back quite easily if you allow that. So.
And what I'm hearing you say is that also that some of the ideas and the technologies of the West can actually help that happen. So it will never be exactly the same, because the whole world has moved on.
Yeah. It's, we are finding out so much more of how to safeguard a place. We don't want to have plastic all over the show, so we start having NGOs that take it away from these places and maybe educate people. There's so much happening, because we know that we have to work together. It's not just about saving our billion people, it's also about saving all the other billions. And so I think there's so much exchange going on. It's very good that it happens, and we can only win the challenge together.
So at the level where people are really concerned about saving not just our billion, where are we looking? Are we looking in governments? Are we looking in universities? Are we looking in scientific institutions, or all of those?
Yeah, there's always some people who are very much in favor of saving the world, in a way.
Right.
It's their big thing. And there are others who put a little bit of a brake on things. Sometimes it seems to me like the EU, for instance, is quite progressive in many ways with the kind of laws that they are pushing and the kind of support that they're giving even to indigenous cultures in the world, while maybe the public opinion in some places in Europe is rather against it at the moment. So, but since it's so multi-tiered, there's always one thing that goes a little bit faster than the other, but as long as the direction is good, as long as the process is moving in that direction, it's
and from your experience,
hopefully fortuitous.
It has been moving forward.
Yeah, not fast enough.
Yes,
not fast enough, and I think it's also because we are struggling to really follow up with what we want to do. We all have these grand ideas of how the world should be like, and we think about the climate and all these enormous challenges, and we end up feeling guilty if we don't fulfill our own goals, and shameful, and it feels so difficult. So it's a bit of a challenge really for us, and it's a big problem, because you have to motivate these hundreds of millions of people to move along. If we all say no, climate change doesn't happen, then the whole thing collapses again, and then it's quite difficult to restart, and time is running out. So what I find is really interesting with this whole anthropology and the connection with indigenous people is that there is so much non-Neolithic living out there of the past, of parallel to us, even in our societies, many people living an alternative lifestyle. So if we just give energy and power to that other way of looking at the world, I think then we have a chance. I think it's very difficult to have a strict lifestyle, of achieving and bigger and faster and all of that, and then stop polluting the planet. But once you see yourself as a non-Neolithic person in a way, that doesn't mean going back to the cave, that just means being alternative. I think then we might have a chance, because then it's like, first of all, what's my priority? To myself, my health. It's not the job. It's authenticity instead of, doing fake things. It's love instead of grabbing things all the time. And once we put these priorities into place, which are very non-Neolithic, then things actually have a chance, because every time you go into the supermarket, you come in with a different view. You come, if you book your holidays, you will think first about what's good for the planet, because you are the planet. You are the nature. It's not somewhere else happening. You're not going into nature. No, you are nature. So what's good for nature, for yourself? It's just a different mindset.
And what are some of the practical ways that you have brought that philosophy into your life?
Well, there's a lot of minor things. I can't change the planet. Yes, I can start, cutting down on my carbon footprint, which I'm trying very much. I can move from a big house to a small little flat like this one, which I did for exactly that purpose. I can do all sorts of little things. But I think the main thing is really to try and educate or motivate other people to do something similar. Because I myself, I can't get rid of I think it's 6,450 tons of carbon footprint that I have.
You've measured it.
I measured it. There are websites that can help you with that. So it's a lot, That's a fleet of 6,450 small cars standing out there, a ton each.
Do you
That's
hold a lot of guilt for that?
Well, guilt, but it's more excitement, because how do I get rid of that huge traffic jam?
Oh, I like that.
I've
I like
amassed?
that way of thinking.
Yeah, it's incredibly, it can really stimulate and make you creative. So yes, I can now become that fisherman and just stand in the water and, very little carbon footprint for the next decades of my life. I can do that, but I'm not going to get rid of the 6,450 tons.
Yes.
I can only get rid if I tell others, or if I show others, if I actually am like an example, if I'm living like an example, and tell people who are important in the decision-making processes, well, stay with your car. Don't buy a new one. Or, it's maybe good to, don't take down that hotel. If I know the hotel owner, just stay with the hotel. It has amassed its carbon footprint long time ago. If you now build a new one, well, that's a lot of carbon footprint. So if you start to calculate like that and do math, then there's a chance to get rid of not only my 6,450, but all the others as well.
To ignite that fire in people,
yeah,
to get excited about shifting, not just
no guilt, no shame.
carbon
That's not the way to do it. It actually will stall the whole process.
Absolutely, and it really does, because if you're sitting in that guilt and shame, then that's what you are emanating.
Yeah.
And how can you change things from there?
Yeah. And it's a no-win situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I love your idea about the excitement of how can I change that for myself and others.
And it's, there are discussions, there are conversations to be held with others. We are all together much stronger in finding solutions for this. And it doesn't need to be that we start a political party, but just speak to your neighbor about this and that when you see something is not working the same way, and say, well, I don't like it this way. I am like this, and maybe you would like to join me in that. And then they have something else to
add.
It's actually amazing of how many people are thinking about this, and yet it's sometimes difficult to implement.
Yeah, and it's nice to be able to start with just the smallest steps from where you're at. I also love how you say, speak to your neighbor, because normally we start with our family, like start here and move out, but our families can sometimes be quite difficult. They don't like to hear what you have to say, because they're family. So start with your neighbor. I like that.
Yeah, that's better. Less resistance.
Yes. Yeah, and not from an angry space, obviously. Exactly.
It's something to learn, if you see someone throw something away with, some plastic on the beach, nobody wants to escalate any situation. It's not going to help us, especially since we have been through political experiences. One's got to be aware of that and not become too aggressive in things. But there are ways that will actually make you come together with another person, and you can end up smiling and be happy about it. And a piece of plastic is gone at the same time.
Point of connection. So you can actually use it to connect with people. Your ideas and philosophies, and as a discussion and a connection.
And it's amazing of how positive people will react. It's, just try it.
You speak from experience in the last 23 years of living in Cape Town and how people act and react to you here.
The experience of this place, of upheaval of the old system and being replaced by something new, and all the difficulties that come with it, and people that had, fought in the struggle and that have been, that feel almost a little deceived by what's happening nowadays, and people that battle it out through the water scarcity and load shedding and crime and all of these things, make people very aware, sometimes traumatized, not so good, but it is just a very fertile ground, I think, for creativity, for finding new ways, and that together with that old dream that South Africa had of people coming together, is not something that you find in these closed encounters, when you go to an event. But even now, last Saturday, how this country came together to celebrate the Springboks after that semi-final win. That was one of these big moments, when you think, oh, actually 20, 30 years ago this would not have happened here, and now it is happening. So
there's hope.
There's hope, and hope is showing itself. It's visible.
Coming into
the
reality.
Diversity is coming together.
And the South African coat of arms actually says diverse cultures unite, which I love, because in my work with the ancient sacred sites, there are faces in the stone from maybe more than 21,000 years ago that are very diverse from different cultures around the world.
Yeah.
And so it almost showing up from generations ago, and it's still part of the zeitgeist or the feeling of Cape Town, where all these diverse cultures are uniting.
Yes, I mean, it has a history of continuous habitation for, what, 100,000 years or so? You know, even if you only look at the archaeological evidence of shell middens, there are very few places in the world that boast that. It's a sizable population over that course of time, and then all the other groups that came here in between. It's for good reason, I think, the most genetically diverse place in the world of a population than more than 1 million people. So yeah, just you know, if you go to the central train station and just look at all these faces, and they all come with history, they all have it in themselves, you know, that whole past is still there. Yeah.
And all the gifts from our ancestry as well, and sometimes a lot of pain, but we've got to remember all the gifts as well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's very fascinating to you.
Yeah. It's you know, empathy is important, of course, in that, because, as you say, it is often a lot of pain and trauma and loss and all the challenges of everyday life. So sometimes it's a bit much to see that, and especially how, you know, even if you look just at how the city center has in some areas changed over the course of the last few years, and how people are living there. So it's not just a romanticized version of the past that you can see. You can also see that a lot of people can't fit in. But it comes with these challenges, but on the other side, it's also possible to do something about it. It's not like a challenge that cannot be addressed because it's too overwhelming. I think the one that we have here in Cape Town can be sorted out in a way. It's a very dynamic place. It has that history of challenge and overcoming challenge. If one place can do it in the world, I'm sure Cape Town can.
Yeah, and to be an example for the rest of the world, because there's certain parts of history here that has been a good example.
Yeah.
I think we were speaking earlier about one of those examples in our history, with the battles that have been here, and
yeah. I mean, it's also that we are in the middle of a rewriting of our story here. That maybe 30 years ago, the story ended with 1652, Jan van Riebeck. And there was a little bit of Bushman culture before that you could see in a museum, but it didn't really matter much, or it was acknowledged, and at the same time it was cast away immediately. It was 1652. And now all the other things are coming up with the Europeans 150 years earlier, when Bushmen actually killed Europeans, and Europeans as a subsequent move declared the whole of southern Africa off limits for, in that case, the Portuguese, you know, which delayed colonization for 150 years. It's a big thing. It didn't happen often in the world that an indigenous culture beat Europeans, and it was the most important European power at the time, and it was the vice king of India that they killed. It had an impact, and of course the apartheid government didn't want to hear much about it, but it's now being rewritten slowly into the history books, and you know, so you extend back more and more and more, and hopefully even the prehistoric times, which is always something that we don't really acknowledge easily in our national narrative, will also be put into our way of thinking and feeling.
And into perspective for where we're at now.
Yeah. It's very important.
And going a little bit more into the prehistoric understanding of the world, we were talking a little bit about my work and my looking into what some cultures called the shining ones.
Yeah.
So I'd love to ask you a little bit about if you've heard about the shining ones and what's come up in the cultures that you've encountered around the world.
Yes, if you mean foreigners that look very different, that come and they change the culture, there's lots of those accounts, and in many ways also in a very gentle way. It's not that people felt a trauma from them. but sometimes it's also generous. Like, okay, you know better than we do, and we have changed our ways to accommodate your material, maybe spiritual advances that you had made. So there are all sorts of little clues in that, in the storytelling of the world, which of course is fascinating. It's difficult to interpret. Who are they? Maybe it was people who migrated there that had different tools with them. Maybe it was people who brought quite striking megalithic monuments with them that didn't exist in the place before. And that's where archaeology or anthropology comes in and tries to uncover what actually happened there, you know, because often it is a form of migration. But yeah, when you look back further than, say, 5,000, 10,000 years, then of course the records become weaker and weaker and smaller, and it's more and more difficult to find an explanation for incredible outbursts of energy and creativity. You know, why do 40,000 years ago these cave paintings appear in Europe? You know, what happened there? And the oldest ones are often the better ones. You know, it's like deep in these cave systems. I went to quite a few of those, fortunately, over the last few decades in southwest France or in northern Spain. And you got to walk in there for a kilometer. And at the end of it, it's total darkness. There's nothing, and all you hear is maybe a little, a waterfall in that cave system, in that mountain that you're in, and maybe there's a little bit of air movement or whatever. And there was this one guy, you know, who painted something way up there, and it's beautiful. It's striking, a bison or something, or a rhino, and nobody was meant to see that anyways, at least not his people. So what did he do there? You know, there are just so many questions about it. And did he do it for the gods, for the spirits? What happened there, you know? So the more and more you look into that, the more and more fascinating it actually gets. And there are all these question marks. And the only access that we can have to that is actually our brain, because our brain is the same of all the other human beings, most of the other human beings. The Neanderthal may be a different case.
But they have built these sacred sites and these paintings that we see today.
Yes, yeah. And so if we understand ourselves better, then maybe there's a way to access these paintings and the reason why they happened. They were us who did it, in a way, unless we believe in people from outer space. But so if you go back to at least to Homo sapiens, to the beginning, there is a way to access that knowledge in a way, but it has to come with intuition, and yeah, maybe also to find out more about their material culture. How did they go about doing it, and did they take any substances, for instance? Were there rituals that brought them into a different mind frame? Then we might have to do that as well. We might have to dance ourselves into trance to understand what was going on there. We can't just sit in our little ivory tower in a university building, you know, air conditioned, and try to imagine that. It becomes more difficult. So there are all these different access points, and it's super fascinating to go back in time and try to uncover that.
And actually being at those sites has a very different feel to it. It's a very different texture in your body. And as we were speaking in the beginning, is to kind of even go into that space where the energy holds the energies of those people from thousands of years ago, and actually just rest and sit in it and stop for a bit. And that's where the access points come in. And to go deeper, you could take a plant substance if you feel that they did, and that's also where part of your work comes in, is to see if those people, what is the evidence around that. Have you found that many cultures around the world have taken plant medicine?
It depends, really. There are all sorts of different shamanic traditions, and the classical shamanism is more about the drumming and not substances. And then in the Americas, it's a bit stronger. In Africa, there's some. Even in Europe, there was a bit of that in old Greek traditions, before it was then overlaid by alcohol, by wine, really by the Dionysian cults. But yeah, so that is certainly part of it. But it might also be that these voices from the past, they could also just come to us, you know, as much as someone who is a medium can access something. So it's not that far away from who we are if we let that happen. We might not even have to take these substances or go into the trance or beat the drum for an extended period of time. We might, some of us might have different accesses. Maybe it would be very interesting to put a few mediums into the cave system in Lascaux or Altamira and see what they come up with.
Someone who's sensitive to the energies.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, wouldn't that be interesting? What can we look at from the past that can support us in our modern living?
I think it's mostly that revelation of what the world was like before it became what it is now with us in the last few thousand years in some places, or here in Cape Town in the last 500 years. And it's accessible in a way when we go into wilderness, you know, when we just go up the mountain and to a place where it's not made into concrete pathways or cableway, but it's there, you know. We got such an access to wilderness here, and that's not nature. Wilderness is a different category of it.
The wild part of nature, not so touched by
not
human...
tamed and not categorized, but you know, where things go wild, and well, it might even be a bit dangerous because there might be an animal that could kill us, and to just go into that space and to feel lost in that space and to feel a little bit of fear in that place, you know, when you are there at night and you have your little campfire and you hear some sound from behind and you don't know what it is, you know, to go back into that state that was the same state for hundreds of thousands of years for our ancestors, you know, what was that? Was it a lion? Is it going to eat me? What is that? So we still have these fears in us. Just, you know, I find that fascinating to go back into wilderness and feel fear again. Of course, it's not the same because I might be sitting in my car while I hear that sound, or I might be safe, but we still hear these sounds that our ancestors had around themselves, and that brought them into, made them creative. They learned how to make fire because they were afraid, you know, all these incredible things that happened over the course of time. And it's there with the land. So we you know, to keep the land, to preserve the land, the wilderness, amazing. And yeah, to also even, you know, it is just something, I don't know, maybe I was brought up with that through my early experiences, or maybe it is just something that's in me. I'm not a medium. I can't channel ancestors easily, past lives and things like that. I just go to someone else to do it for me. But my thing is maybe to see even built up landscapes in a way that what they might have looked like before anyone had moved in and built a house there. So, and it's so easy to do that here. I remember during lockdown, you know, when the mountain was closed, to eventually go up, and I just needed to be on the mountain. It was still closed, but I just climbed some fences and got in there, and all the movement of our modern, you know, of joggers and dog walkers, nothing against them, you know, I'm also happily one of them sometimes, but all that had withered away. Within a few weeks it was all gone, and to be up there, and it felt like, okay, this was it, this was civilization, you know, that was these 500 years since some Vasco da Gama or Bartolomeo Diaz crossed that cape. It's just gone, you know, and this is the place again. It feels like it, and I find that that's a fascinating little exercise to do sometimes, to just take it all away and imagine what it was like, and to step into that other world. It's all about stepping into other worlds all the time, you know. It's South Africa, the old South Africa, the new South Africa, our lives. We travel to get into the other world. We come back into our world. We are constantly moving about between realities, and to also look into that reality of wilderness and the prehistoric way of living as an inspiration for us today. It's as big a reality as ours, and to make big changes now for what is remaining of our civilization, it's very important to get the clues from the other side, from the other reality.
It's almost a feeling of being in those spaces that are less touched by human activity. It's the feeling that it brings. It's the feeling that it feels so peaceful, and you feel like you're part of that nature, which we are always, but when we're living such busy lives, we forget.
Yeah.
So it's almost like going into those wild places just brings us, it's like Africa does that to you.
Yeah.
You just become part of the landscape. You feel so grounded in Africa, because they are such wide open, untouched spaces that it just brings that feeling of like, I'm landing.
Yeah.
And then to go back into your life and remember that feeling and bring it with you.
Yeah. And you can enhance the experience by reading books about it, or you don't have to, because you can just go to a cave painting or rock art site here in the Cedarburgs and you fall asleep, have a little siesta there next to it, and to look at the dreams that you then have, there might be something happening, and that all adds up to the experience as much as books do, and experiences of other people. It's a whole wealth of information out there. And that's a bit strange maybe, being an anthropologist and having gone through all the academia and having read all these books and studied and still studying, I acknowledge more and more that it's in us, the whole library of mankind and womankind is in us.
I think that's a really strong thing to remember, is that it is inside of us. Stop looking outside all the time. It is good to have all that information to trigger the memories. But to remember, it is inside us. It's in our DNA. It's from our ancestors. It's in the energy of the spaces, in those wild places, in those sacred spaces that our ancestors have spent time in. Yeah.
And to share that, there are lots of travelers who are out on the same trajectory who want to find inspiration by that, and to look around and share that and share thoughts and come together. It's you've done these journeys, with your groups up in Botswana, in the Kalahari, and with the local people, and isn't it a wonderful experience? I mean, it can't get much better than that.
It is the most amazing experience. Yeah. What can individuals do about the melting ice caps? What can I do, apart from bring awareness to it? What decisions can we make that would make a difference?
Very, very complex. I thought a lot about it. Because yes, one thing is stop cruise ships to Antarctica, but that's not the point. It's, when you add up the numbers of the carbon footprint of passengers on cruise ships, it is not the reason why that glacier is gone. The glacier is gone because something else happens in the world. And very, very likely human-made climate change is the reason for that. And so, when we look at our lifestyles, we are flying around like crazy. We are using the resources of this planet, and we got to do something about it. And we have to stop doing that. And I think that's why it can't really happen through little minute changes in our individual behavior, but it has to be that as many of us actually have a glimpse of the other reality, of what there is at stake, what wilderness can teach us. Once we do that, or if we do it over and over again, in some cases it might need 30 years for us to come to that awareness that that is actually the real reality, and this is a little fake bubble on top of it, the sugar icing, that's quite toxic in a way, but beautifully colorful, and we are addicted to it and attracted by it, but it should not take over our experience, and it should not take over the lives of who come after us. You know, we should, well, but I don't want to be speaking too much about the shoulds, because I really think it is one of the most fascinating journeys that we can do. It's not just about geographical travel in this lifetime. It is about these challenges and coming together and looking at an obstacle from different angles and trying to push that out of the way and go on and survive. You know, we want to survive.
Find solutions and thrive.
Yeah.
Together.
Yes, yeah, all of us, you know, down to the little snail.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bernd, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating, all of the experiences that you've shared with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It was lovely.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, please write a review and rate the NixyPod show. It helps to get this information out to more of our soul tribe. Thank you for listening.